Today we're going to go through competition brisket, and I'm going to do this exactly like I do at a competition. For those competition cooks out there that want a little insight into brisket, it may give you some help. For you cooking at home, it'll give you an idea of what competition brisket is. And you may want to modify this recipe slightly, but it's a great recipe for eating brisket at home also. The main thing we want to start with when looking for a brisket for a competition is we want something that's fairly thick down at this end. So whenever I go to the grocery store to get a brisket for competition, I look for a brisket that's fat here, and also want something that when you do this, it kind of flexes, shows you that the muscles aren't real tight, because we want something nice and tender. I typically get a Packers trim brisket that is choice or prime, and this one here is choice. So we'll start by opening the brisket up. The Packers trim brisket has two muscles to it. We have the flat, and then we'll have what we will call the point up here on the top. For cooking competitions, I separate those two muscles so that we can have burn ends to go in the box and then the flats. And so we'll begin today by separating those two muscles. This can be a little bit tricky, but when you learn about it, what you'll find is this piece of muscle or fat right here goes all the way through and connects to this piece of fat here. And basically, if we start cutting there, we can take this whole muscle and flip it back. And so that's what we'll begin with today. As we take and slice between these two muscles, it's just nice and easy to get them started, and then to just work your way down the muscle and just keep right in the fat. The objective here is not to cut into the flat part of the brisket. At some point in time, you get down here to the area and you just want to take and finish that off, then start working our way towards the middle of the brisket. There are other ways to separate these two muscles, but I find this to be the easiest to really keep from cutting into the two muscles and to get us a nice point to work with our burn ends. As I start to get over here to the other side of the brisket, then what I want to do is I want to flip the brisket over, and I'm going to take this muscle or this fat that's right here, and we're going to cut into it. Just take it off of the brisket. This will help us see where we're going as we cut through the brisket. What we'll find is we'll find the line of fat through the brisket that's where we want to separate the two muscles at. So right here we want to separate our two muscles. So we work our way back. You can see the brisket just wants to come apart. We'll just continue right on down that line. And now we've separated out the flat and the point. Once we separate those out, then we want to continue to trim. And with a competition brisket, I want to remove almost all the fat. Leave just a little bit on it. The flat portion, I'll leave a little bit of fat on the top to give us a little more moisture. If you leave a lot of fat up there, you'll end up without getting any seasoning flavor into the top part of the meat. Now we have the majority of the fat off the front side. I always just turn it over and take off anything off the back side. Fat-wise, it might be hanging out there. Well, we have the brisket flipped over. One of the things that we want to look at is how the grain is running in the muscle, because when we cut the brisket, we want to cut it against this grain. So what I always do is I take and find the grain, which is going this direction, and then I come in at a 90-degree angle to that and cut a piece off of the end of the brisket. This way, when we get ready to trim or to slice the brisket flat, we'll know which direction to cut. The other thing that we want to do is that for a competition box, our box is 9 inches wide. So we want to make sure that we're 9 inches throughout this portion of the brisket. If we get wider than that, then it doesn't want to fit into the box. You can take a ruler if you'd like. I happen to know this knife's about 9 inches, so we're pretty good on this brisket. I would probably just take and trim just a small amount off over here, and a small amount here, so that we get nice clean edges. The brisket flat's ready to be injected now. We'll work on the point next. This is for our burnt ends, and this piece of meat has a lot of fat marbled into it, and so we want to take off all the fat that's on the top and the bottom of it. And this takes a little bit of time, but not bad. We'll just trim up all this fat off the top of the point. Here's our brisket flat and our point now all trimmed and ready to go to the next step. We're going to inject the brisket flat. The point we're going to leave just as it is, and we'll just season it. It has so much fat marbled into it that there's no real reason to inject it. We'll inject the flat with Butcher's brisket injection. We'll mix that up exactly per his instructions, and we'll inject the flat with that. We have our injection made. We'll just take and inject that into our brisket. And what we want to do is we want to inject across the grain of the brisket at about 1 inch intervals. As we inject, you want to go about halfway through the brisket and then just pull your needle out as you push in. This way you get a nice amount of injection into each one. The Butcher's brisket injection has some real beefy flavors to it, so it really helps the flavor of the brisket. And then it also has some phosphates in it, which really help grab a hold of the moisture in the brisket and hold on to it so that you get a really nice, moist, tender brisket out of it. We now have that injected. I usually then take a paper towel and wipe the excess injection off of it. Next, we're going to take sugar in the raw, and we're going to lightly coat the brisket with the sugar. This helps to give us a little bit of sweetness with our brisket. We'll also do the point with this. We're now going to put the brisket back into the refrigerator and let it sit for about 4 hours. After our brisket is set now for 4 hours in the sugar, we're going to take it out of the refrigerator and we're going to season it. We're going to use Cookshack brisket rub. We just want to lightly season the brisket, but we want to make sure that we cover the entire brisket with the seasoning. This will give us a really nice flavor throughout. One of the things in competition, we want to make sure that we get all the edges, as we want the brisket to really look nice as we slice into it. Get both sides. The brisket point then we're going to season a little heavier. I usually pat the rub into the point because of all the fat. It wants to kind of bleed out as it cooks. Once again, we want to make sure we get all of our edges. And now we're seasoned and we're ready to go into the smoker. Ready to get the brisket into the FEC100 now. In competition cooking, you have to use a wood-fired smoker, and so the Fast Eddy line of pellet cookers are approved on the KCBS, the ICBA, and the Memphis in May circuits. So we're going to start this out at a very low temperature. We're going to start smoking it at 180 degrees. We're going to do that for 8 hours. We're then going to set the controller on the FEC100 so that the hold temperature is at 250. So once it cooks for 8 hours at 180 degrees, then we're going to raise that temperature up to 250. And it takes about 3 hours to 4 hours then to reach our internal temperatures. We want the internal temperature of the flat to reach 195 degrees, and we'll pull it at 195. The point we want to take all the way up to 210, and then we'll pull it at that. Because in the competition world, we want to get a lot of flavor into the meat. I normally cook with hickory pellets for home use, but out on the cook-off circuit, I use mesquite pellets to try to get as much smoke flavor as possible into the meat.